uh, at, it looks like it's 6:39, and I apologize for the late start, but it's due to technical issues here, trying to get all the equipment working. So first of all, roll call, Patsy Brecious, chairman here. Carl, all of you, please.
Carl Dickens here.
And
David Watford Raleigh here.
Rick McQuaid here.
Michael Witherspoon here.
Tyler Fairbairn here.
here, okay, and is there, on the other people that are on the Zoom also, please announce yourself. Steve,
Oh, Steve Mednick is here.
okay,
Henry Dakowitz,
And Ed Camacho, BET, is here.
Tom Ellis is here.
Tom Livingston, a member of the Common Council.
Greg Burnett, Finance Chairman.
okay. So we have a quorum of the Charter Revision Commission. So the minutes of November 17th are before the commission. A motion to approve is in order. November 16, I'm sorry.
I motion to approve.
Thank you. And second,
I'll second.
okay, Carl, different seconds. Any discussion, any changes? Hearing none, seeing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The motion carried.
I abstain.
Oh,
Yeah.
and Rick McQuaid abstains,
Mike Ward.
and Michael also, as they were not present at the meeting. Thank you both. We're going to rearrange the agenda because of starting late and other city
Hey.
officials having other meetings that they need to attend. So I believe we're going to start with finance. Steve?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. We're going to have a panel discussion to discuss the general and capital fund budget process and operations. The intent was to start off with the CFO, with Henry Dakowitz, but I think we're going to ask, as Henry indicated earlier, the president of the council, the chair of the Finance and Claims Committee, Greg Burnett, to give us some comments on the role of the council and other issues that he sees. What we're going to do when it comes back to Henry, Henry will walk us through the process from step one to the end of the process, both for capital and general fund. But since Greg has a time frame, we thought we would start with him to at least discuss his perspective as member of the council participating in the budget process. He's also a former member of the BET. So I'll be happy to defer to the president.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. It would be helpful if there's a specific set of guidelines or questions that you want me to address, as opposed to going through the entire budget process from A to Z, which I think Mr. Dakowitz is going to cover.
So my question to you, Mr. President, would be, are there specific issues that you perceive in the current process that should be looked at by the Charter Commission? So I'm not going to ask you to walk through every step of the process, but you've been through the process many times in three different capacities. I didn't mention the Board of Education. And so I thought that you might have a good perspective on some of the, let's say, the potholes, the bumps in the road, so to speak.
Or any way that we could make it more efficient and more understanding for the public. That's one of our goals.
Great, thank you. I guess to start first with the operating budget. I would view the operating budget in its current form. The process is fairly, in my opinion, efficient, in that it is spearheaded by the finance department in terms of setting the timeline, the timetable for input on the operating budget, conducting the necessary department reviews. And then after that set of reviews, then the council gets involved in terms of reviewing the proposed budget document from the chief financial officer. That might be an area to look into closer, that should the council have more direct input into the operating budget as opposed to the current process in the development of the operating budget, as opposed to kind of receiving the coordinated input from the departments. And at that point, it would take, we don't want to backtrack, but the question I would have is, how can the council be more involved in the operating budget process? That would be my overall question there. As it relates to the capital budget, the BET plays a very strong role in the formulation of the capital budget, they have a line-by-line item review of the capital budget after the council has set the cap. They can't change the cap. They could recommend an increase to the cap after they've completed their due diligence. And it would be up to a supermajority of the Common Council to increase the cap.
Greg, excuse me for a second, because I
Yes.
always get confused. My understanding is for the operating budget, the council sets the cap and the BET looks at individual line items. But for the capital budget, it's reversed.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yes, did I say capital? I meant to say operating.
Okay,
Yes.
good. Yeah, all right.
And the
Yeah,
BET
yeah.
sets the cap on the capital, and the council gets to look at individual projects.
Right.
That is correct. I misspoke by flip what I said to operating and capital.
Okay,
So I think my overall thoughts would be, how can the council have more input into the creation, the development of both the operating and capital budgets before it gets to a point where we're either setting a cap as it relates to the operating budget. And in terms of the capital budget, the council is fairly much involved at the very end of the process. The overall council, there is involvement from the council committee to review the capital input, but the overall approval of the capital budget is at the very end of the process. So I'll pause there in terms of how the council can be more actively involved in the creation and providing commentary and input to both the operating and capital budget.
So Greg, quick question. This is Charles Dickens. For my edification, so I heard you right. Council is not involved in putting the pieces together for the budget. You don't see the budget till the pieces are put together, and then that's at the end when you get to take a vote on it or not, or what am I missing here?
That your assessment is correct.
Okay.
Okay. Now, this is Patsy speaking. Several of the committees of the Common Council, for instance, Department of Public Works Committee, the School Building Committee, they should have review with staff and before it goes on, or are they not doing that currently?
When you say several committees,
Well, a committee like the Department of Public Works Committee. The Common Council Committee for the Department of Public Works.
so if I understand your question, for example, is the the Common Council Committee for Public Works reviewing the budget
Right,
of the Public Works Committee before they submit that information into
Of the
Of the
the
department, of the
Finance Committee.
department.
The,
Does
the
the-
answer is no, they are not.
Well, and would that be the place where you would think that they could have some input?
Possibly. I don't know the exact answer to that, but that is one possibility. Not every council committee. I don't know if we were to break it into segments of just the council committees, would that cover all of the inputs
Yeah.
of the budget? I think the answer to that is no. There are other departments that do not fall under
Correct. Yeah.
the council committees
Mhm,
Right.
that should have input into the creation of the budget.
Mhm.
mhm.
Could I offer a perspective?
Please announce yourself for the record.
Amy Dakowitz, CFO.
Okay, thank
The
you.
way I view the budget process is that on the operating side, the budget department prepares pro forma budgets based on guidance from the mayor as to what kind of increases we're looking for. And by calculating the salaries, which are contractual with currently 2.3% increases, plus contractually, many individuals get step increases based on where they are on their salary scales. So they look at those payroll costs, which are obviously a big driver of our expenses, as well as line item expenses. We then send that to the departments. They have approximately 3 weeks to review and then formulate their request. The budget department and I then sit with each of these departments to review. Here's what we said as a recommendation, as a pro forma. Here's what you've requested. Let's talk through the differences. After that, that's a lot of work with 30 different departments. After that, the budget director and I sit down with the mayor and chief of staff. And we say, here's the information we got. Here's what we said pro forma. Here's what they said recommendation. Here are the explanations they gave. And technically, the mayor and I come up with a CFO and mayor recommended operating budget. That's the first step. We've done the grunt work. Now it goes for reviews. And I think it goes to the council and the BET. They have different roles. But the point is, in my mind, if every department had to go before every committee, that would be burdensome. And if we've done our job right, we're getting the council and the BET to focus on the big picture. They can zoom in on any area, any department, any line item. So from that perspective, I'm going to agree with Greg. The process today is pretty efficient. We do the grunt work and we can always circle back to individual departments. The BET has every department come in and say, are you satisfied with the recommendation or do you want to change? So that's where we are with the current process. And my feeling is it's lengthy. We're looking 6 to 8 months, but it gives everyone a chance to advocate for their position, to be questioned by the people who are reviewing it, and for people to make the recommendations.
So I just have a quick comment, Henry, is so,
Identify yourself.
oh, Carl Dickens again. So the way this budgeting process works, and I probably use the wrong terminology, but it sounds like you back into it. In other words, you have a target number for the whole city. And then you build to that number?
Well, we need guidance from the mayor on, because the budgets dictate what the amount of tax increase is going to be.
Right,
So we have expenses by each department. Then we have other expenses which are citywide, which are often less controllable. My best examples are health insurance, pension and OPEB contributions, and debt service. And those tend to be at a higher increase than the controllable expenses. We also look at the revenues generated by each department, and we want to test it. I don't want to have a budget with inflated revenue assumptions that aren't realistic.
Sure.
So the point is, if we don't have guidance, we can start this process with departments asking for 5 to 10%, and then we have to start cutting all over the place. So that's why we get some guidance from the mayor upfront. And then we work our way through to cover the revenue expense by department, those other expenses, which are often controlled by my team. And then last, we look at how we can bridge the gap, because we have to come in with a balanced budget. So let's say revenues minus expenses are going up on an net expenditure basis by 5%. And these are just illustrative. But the mayor doesn't want taxes to go up by more than 3.5%. We then have some pools of money, currently ARPA, but generally our rainy day fund. And we may suggest, let's draw down from those sources to bridge the gap between what the net expense increase was and what our target tax increase is. And that's what the mayor and I do before the recommended budget. So we
Excuse me, Henry, I have to jump to another meeting in
Right,
1 minute.
yes.
And the only point I want to make, and Henry, you're going to probably cover this when you go over the schedule, is that there are specific dates in the charter whereby Henry's department has to deliver specific information.
Correct.
Those dates would be an area that I would suggest we look at in terms of how we might be able to extend those dates to allow more time for activities, as I mentioned, make more council involvement in the development of the charter. Right now, it's a fairly tight schedule, and there's a lot of things to be done, which doesn't allow much wiggle room to have reviews and discussions. We have to move at a very fast pace. So if there's any area within the charter to discuss moving some of these dates to meet state requirements, et cetera, but at the same time allowing more time for review and discussion, I think that would be a positive improvement to our overall process.
Are you suggesting we start earlier in the year?
Well, I'll leave that up to Mr. Dakowitz to talk about that. But I would focus more on the back end as things. There's specific dates when things have to happen rather quickly in terms of publishing information, approving information, et cetera. I think we have an opportunity to revisit those dates to see if they allow us more collaboration as it relates to the budget formation.
And I would like to add, 3 years ago, which was my first full budget, we extended the calendar. The calendar used to be 6 or 6.5 months. We extended it to 8 months, exactly what you proposed. We started earlier because we found when the budget department was making those reviews with the individual departments, it was all telescoped in 2 weeks. And we felt we didn't get good enough information. We felt much too much pressure. So we got the documents, the pro formas out earlier. We got them, we still gave them 3 weeks, but we got their information. We were able to review it, and we were able to have a reasonable pace for us to create our information. And I think the calendar is a wonderful tool, as Greg pointed out, that we can play with if certain groups or individuals feel they're not getting enough time for the consideration they need and collaboration, we can try to bake in some more time for their reviews. And that's some of the flexibility, except for what's legally constraining us either at the state level or at the charter right now. Very good.
Mr. Camacho, do you have any comments that are helpful for us on this?
No, I don't. I think the process is long enough. I think that if we ask, if we extend it, I'm sure we'll be able to fill that time. But you know, I don't know that more time will yield a better result. I think all the departments feel that they are heard, certainly when they come before the BET. They make their cases to the finance department and through the finance department to the mayor, and then they come to the BET to make a final plea to the extent that they might, you know, still have some issues with the recommended budget. And so I think the process works well. I think it's probably long enough. It seemed to have started earlier this year than I remember in past years. And I think that's a good thing if that's the case. But I don't think that, you know, I think it worked pretty efficiently. I'm not sure that I would change anything about it.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, anybody else have any?
I just
comment?
have one
Yeah,
thing. It's,
Rick, please identify.
Wait, oh, I'm sorry, Steve. Did you have something? Steve?
That's okay. I'll defer to a member.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Rick McQuaid. I've had the pleasure, I guess, from both sides. When I was on the council, I was able to, you know, with the budget, we always thought there was a rush schedule. I do have to say now, being in the department head, working with Henry and Tom and his department, very flexible, very good. I think the process works great. And Tom has got me out of a couple holes this year because I was away. But the process really does work well. And you have to remember too, that we're running departments at the same time this is all going on. And it's tough, like I explained to Tom, was, you know, we got our first budget information things during the election time, and it was just impossible to do both at the same time. They were more than accommodating with our department to put it together and to work with us, and even a little extra help staying after school a little bit with Tom. But the process for the operating budget, I only have an operating budget. It really does work well, but I do understand from the council side and from the Board of Estimate side that the schedule does get really, you know, rugged down toward the end there. And if it did have a little more extension, I think it would benefit all of us.
Hey, do we want to move on now to the capital budget discussion?
Well,
Or do you have something to add, Steve?
the only thing I was going to say with regard to schedule, and then the question I have, I'll raise the question when I'm done, is one of the things we can do is we can allow for greater flexibility as opposed to having locked in fixed dates in the charter.
Yeah.
We can have not later than provisions. So
Okay.
that would allow for some flexibility. We can determine what the start is and what the end is in the process, and then have not later than, and then have a budget schedule agreed to at the beginning of the process.
Yeah,
They kind of do it informally right now, and I think that the scheduled calendar that they put together on both sides of the budget are really very useful. And so so we could probably try to mirror that as we reconfigure the charter. The other thing I wanted to point out for everybody, and I don't think I've pointed this out yet, is that in 2018, the General Assembly, or 2017, the General Assembly adopted legislation that permits charter revision for purposes of reordering budget schedules by legislative bodies. So the council, by a 2/3 vote at any time, can amend the charter, actually amend the charter, not pass an ordinance, but alter the charter so that if the process we develop is either flawed or needs minor changes or tweaks, you don't have to wait for a full-blown charter revision. You do have the flexibility and the ability to amend your charter for purposes of budget scheduling by virtue of council action of 2/3 of the members of the council. So I wanted to point that out as another prophylactic that you have available if we don't actually reach perfection in this process.
does anybody want to respond to that concept? Ed, I see you sort of shaking your head there.
No, I think that's a good thing. I didn't know that. I wasn't aware of that we don't have to amend the charter every time we want to.
Yeah.
do that.
Great,
Only for budget schedules. It's a very
Right.
limited
Right.
charter power.
I think that's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, no, it's a great thing. Thank the Speaker of the House. It's his baby.
Anyone else want to address that concept? I don't see any other. Okay, so we want to move on to capital.
Well, I don't think he finished. I don't think we actually, Henry, did you?
Do you want to share your screen with the operating budget? I'll walk through quickly. These are the actual calendars we've distributed for this year. And I will explain what I call the external and the internal calendars.
Okay.
Top guy there.
Can you blow it up a little?
We have hard copies. We have hard copies of the schedule
Yeah, let me-
with
Okay,
us.
that's-
I handed them out, Henry.
yeah,
excellent.
Yeah, okay.
So then why don't we scroll down a little so I can get less heading? Perfect. Okay? No? Right. So just to reiterate what we said before, this is the operating budget calendar. Friday, October 28th, we sent out our pro forma budget packages. So it's not just the numbers, it's how to access the computer system and how to do all the things we need you to do step by step. October 31st to November 18th, those are the 3 weeks. We give the city departments time to review, plan, prepare, and input their data. November 18th to December 5th, that gives us a couple of weeks to review the numbers. We can go back and check. Did you mean this? Was this an error? Did we get it right? And then from December 22nd, the Board of Ed files its operating budget request. And we haven't gotten there yet. That's why I don't recall it.
You'll remember it when you get there for
Oh,
sure.
I bet I will, but I must have skipped. So from December 5th to the 21st, that's 2.5 weeks. This is where we schedule meetings with each department. And I call the calendar on the page my external calendar, big picture. And then just to schedule those 30 departments is what I call my internal calendar. And we try to juggle with different departments. I'll give you an example. The IT department, in order to develop their budget, has to talk to every other department and say, what are your IT needs for the year? So we would schedule them near the end of this 3-week process. There are some departments that only have 1 or 2 people, very straightforward budget. We'll schedule them. So we schedule them to give each department enough time to get this done well. What I'll add now, some departments, usually police department, DPW, Public Works, as well as economic development, prefer, because they have lots of different divisions, to do the operating discussions with us and the capital discussions at the same time.
Mhm.
And sometimes there are linkages. So for example, one department last year needed 2 people and a truck to perform certain services. The truck was a capital expense, the 2 people were operating. But if you don't get one, you don't need the other. So sometimes there's a linkage. So just understand, we're very flexible. We try to accommodate the departments. You know, it takes a lot of their time to sit with us. If we could do it in one shot, we try to do that. We get to December 22nd, Board of Ed gives us their operating budget. We skip the holidays. We get to January 11th, Board of Ed reviews their budget with our department. So we've looked at it for a week or 2. January 12th, the Common Council Finance and Claims Committee, which is what Greg heads, and the Board of Ed Finance Committee have a joint meeting. Now, we've already had one public meeting with both of these parties. And privately, the Board of Ed finance team and the city finance team have been having meetings with representatives of the Board of Ed and the Finance Committee, along with the mayor and the superintendent, to try to communicate better so that there are fewer surprises when we get to some of the public meetings. February 13th, that begins my hell week. You see, Monday, February 11th, 13th, Tuesday, the 14th, Thursday, the 16th. This is where the mayor and I have finalized our recommended operating budget. And I presented on Monday night to the BET, I believe, Tuesday night to the full council, Thursday night to the finance committee. And so that's when we publicly disclose what that recommended budget is. And it gives each of those bodies a chance to ask questions. We don't understand, where is this line by line? February 17th, we published the recommended budget and the tax levy and the notice of annual meeting of the BET in the newspaper. So what we're saying is, this is obviously a requirement, at least 5 days before the fourth Monday in February. I'm not sure if that's charter or ordinance, that's beyond me. But the point is, that's when we have to give the notice. We have to make sure it gets into the newspapers. We get to Thursday, the 23rd, okay. Common Council Finance and Claims holds a public hearing. So not only are we dealing with the full council, the Finance Committee and BET, we have public. So about a week after we make the presentation, the Finance Committee holds public hearings. And a special meeting to be held immediately following forwards the recommended operating budget to the Common Council. So the council is going to have to vote to establish the cap. So what's happening is they get a week to review what was published the week before. We then have a public hearing, and right after the hearing, the Finance Committee votes on what they send to the council, as most legislation always comes through a committee. Tuesday, March 7th, the council establishes the budget cap. And like most things, they rely heavily on the committee that forwards it to them. These are the finance experts, but at the same time, they have made questions and issues. So we publish or issue our information the week of February 14th, and the council establishes the cap March 7th. So we're looking at about 3 weeks, during which time Finance Committee reviews with a public hearing. From March 8th to March 21, now that the council has established the cap, there's about 2 weeks, Ed's BET conducts meetings with all the departments. And I can tell you, 2 weeks for that is tight. But the goal here is to allow everybody to come in and say, we don't like what the mayor recommended. We really, usually, they don't say less, they usually want more. And the BET considers all these requests. We usually keep a list of items that they say, let's put that on the list to consider. And after that 2-week period, so March 22nd, there's also a public hearing. So during those 2 weeks, they start thinking about which items they might want to consider to add to the line items. And then there's also a public hearing of the tentative operating budget. So again, we have a cap, and the way the law works, I believe, is that the BET can shuffle the dollars that's under the cap maximum from department to department, line item to line item. However, if at the end of the day they say, we think we want to spend more than the cap, it then goes back to the council for a vote. So 8th to the 21st, the BET is holding hearings and creating a list of items that they're interested in. Some years, they look at that list and they say, yes, we want to move the numbers, but we're going to find savings elsewhere to pay for it within the cap. 22nd, they also hear from the public. On the 27th, the BET completes its review and forwards it to the tentative operating budget to the council. So what have they done? they've heard all the departments, they've heard from the public. They decide whether they want to make changes, adding based on certain requests, cutting some others, and have a big picture. Are they going to come in within the cap, or are they going to request more? The 27th, they complete its review. Tom, go down a couple of lines, please. And we're almost there. On April 11th, so that's, again, 2 weeks later, the council has a regular meeting and sets its final cap. And again, I'm not sure if it's during these 2 weeks, because I've never experienced that. But if the BET says, you set a cap, I'm picking a number, $400 million. And we believe it should be $402 million. The council can either agree and increase the cap, but if they don't agree, they say, no, we want to keep it at 400. It goes back to the BET to make sure that their line by line items equals 400 and not more. Either they don't give those extra items, or they find savings by cutting other line items.
Can I
Then-
ask one procedural question here?
Sure.
If there's no change in the cap,
Right,
on the 27th, you have them forwarding the budget to the Common Council. Is there a need to forward to the Common Council if there's no change in the cap?
I think it's a technicality. If
Well,
they-
there's one, I think there's one thing, we could come under the cap, so the BET could come in under the cap. I don't believe that there's a role at that point for the Common Council to do anything other than, I guess, approve it in a sort of a
Right,
pro forma kind of way.
it's
we
a
could come
thumbs
under-
up, it's a thumbs up or a thumbs down.
Yeah.
It's not to exceed a cap. And if they say, you know what, we saw your 400 million and we really think it should be 398. As long as it's at or below the cap, the council has nothing to do. They set the cap.
Mhm.
And if BET decides less than the cap, that's what stands. If it's more, it would require the council to vote to agree to increase the cap. If they don't, then it goes back to the BET and says, your max was the cap. Please make sure you do that.
So they would not necessarily see the budget again if the BET approved budget is within the cap that they approved.
I think there's no action to be taken.
Okay.
And I'm not sure, but I think to increase the cap, is there a super majority involved, or is that?
Yes.
That is
yeah.
correct.
Charter says that,
Yep.
yes.
So, oh, you mean for the council to
Yes.
to go to the 402?
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Majority.
believe it's not a simple majority, it's a super majority. Was it 2/3?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay,
Yes, it's in the charter.
okay, so that's, then you have April 11th, the council has the regular meeting. But, April 19th, we publish the tentative operating budget and the tax levy. So once we set that budget, we have those items which I call below the line, below the individual departments. So we have reserves for collection from our tax levy. We have debt service and insurance and some of those other citywide expenses. But it comes down to what are the actual tax rates, the mill rates by taxing district and the average tax bill. So we calculate all that. And my understanding is that the BET has the authority and obligation to set the tax levy. So that's why it's a tentative operating budget and tax levy. We double and trickle check our numbers. And then we have a Board of Estimate meeting where there's an official vote to make it enacted. And that's that first Monday in May. That must be when the Supreme Court meets.
So that's-
Right?
that's
I'm not a
October.
lawyer, but I just.
October is the Supreme Court, not May.
Oh, so May, the end of the season,
Yeah.
okay.
So the mayor does not play any further role. There's no veto. The actions of the BET are the final actions.
My understanding is that the mayor makes his recommendation. And then everything is the city council the Common Council or the E BET.
And the mayor's a member of the BET, so he has a role, obviously, at the BET.
But it's not so much just the BET that has the final say, it's the combination of the BET and the common council.
But you're a little muffled, Ed. Can you-
Sorry, it's a
Close.
combination of the BET and the common council that have the final say. But I guess the BET signs the official setting of the tax levy, I guess.
Yeah. So the final action is a BET action, and the council may or may not have, they set the cap, but they may not have any further role if the cap isn't exceeded.
Correct.
Right. Okay.
All right,
I just noticed that throughout this, you reference the need for public notice. And it's always just the newspaper. And through the years, I've heard many people saying we need to modernize and get on the web. And so that needs to be in the charter or whatever other more contemporary means of notice should be considered by this Charter Revision Commission.
Madam Chair, I've pointed out that we're going to do a definition of public notice, and that will include all the electronic media, as well as discretion to place it in the newspaper. To respond to a point that was raised by the CFO a few moments ago, the newspaper publication requirement is a charter requirement. It's not a statutory requirement. So we can change that in this process. And I recommend that we just change it by changing the general definition of notice for all entities.
Exactly.
That would
Yeah.
include if the town determines by ordinance or by policy that it's necessary to go into the newspaper, fine, but the first means should be whatever's permitted by FOIA, and electronic publication is certainly permitted by FOIA.
yeah, I would advocate that it should be or, not and.
Right.
The local newspapers, and we only have one right now. We have to give notices of so many things, like when we go out to borrow money, we have certain meetings, we have to give public notice. It costs us a fortune, and a lot of people don't read the paper anymore, so we are strong supporters of that redefinition.
Yeah. Unfortunately, there are some people, however, who do not use the web. So some kind of a combination for everybody needs to be considered.
Well, one of the things that you could put in the charter is that anyone who requests a written copy of a document would be entitled to it. That would be available at the town clerk's office. You could probably put it in the public libraries. There's a number of things you can
Yeah.
do
Libraries.
to accommodate that, because the
Without
expense-
advertising, meaning just the piece of paper.
Yeah.
Or like, this is the notice that we publish on our website, and we have it available if you want to see the hard copy.
Correct.
Great, good, that sort of accommodates everyone.
Okay.
Does Ed have any further comments on the operating, since Ed's here and we've just kind of gone through the operating budget, does he, from a BET perspective, have any comments on the process?
No, I think it's all been said. I don't know of any way to improve the process or make it more efficient. I think it runs pretty well. I mean, obviously there's the usual complaint that we would like more of a line item review of the Board of Ed budget, but that I think is dictated by statute, and I'm not sure that we have anything to do with that at this point. So, I mean, that would be great if we can have more transparency in that budget, but it is what it is at this point.
What you can do, Ed, and members of the commission, is you're absolutely right. The statutes give the Board of Education line authority within their budget. You have bottom line authority, but we have Supreme Court law that says that any information you want from the Board of Ed, they have to provide you. So if the CFO prepares documents, they have to provide the information that he requests in those documents, such in the same manner that the planning department has to file, or the city and town clerk, or the town clerk has to file. They are subject to all the procedures of the municipality, even if you can't control their lines, you can see their lines and ask for their lines.
Good
And
to
we
know.
could do that today, even before we change the charter.
You can do that today. You know, it doesn't have to be in the charter. That's as a matter of policy, you can require them to you can tell them what date you want them to submit their documents to you.
I'm very sensitive because they have their own Board of Ed they have to respond to, and until they get voted, it's not official. However,
No, but their Board of Ed has to comply. The Board of Ed can't override a policy of the
no,
cities.
but what
Yeah.
I'm mostly talking about dates.
Yeah.
That they have set meetings. The former CFO at the Board of Ed tried to move it to December. And it was just so hard. The Board of Education needed more time. It comes in January. It's obviously the latest department. However, Tom and his team in budget prepare very detailed schedules on both revenue and expense, line item by line item, for every single department. And they go back a couple of years. They say, what was the actual spend, let's say, in 2020 and 2021? And then in 2022, we don't have audited numbers yet, but we have a projection of what you spent for 22. And then we look at your budget requests. So if we were able to request from them, please give us department by department, or however you're organized, school by school, whatever. Here are the object codes, the individual expenses, salaries, overtime, professional services, whatever. And we want to see a couple of years history, 23, which is a projection, and then your request, item by item, list by list. I think that might be meaningful to council members and the BET. And if they are, I have no problem having a discussion with Linda and saying, this is coming, they want it. Here's about the time we'd like to see it. And we just include it in the package. Ed, what do you think?
I think that's great. I think the concern would be that the request is could be so specific and so far-reaching that it could sort of swallow the state statute in a way. But I think what you suggested, which is more targeted, makes sense. I suspect, or I assume, that their lawyer knows or understands the court rulings in this respect, and knows that that the information has to be provided. So we hopefully won't have too much resistance.
Steve, if you could send me something, like almost like a lawyer statement that says, according to just what you said with some, I don't know, citations. And if the mayor is agreeable, I would try to give them a heads up as soon as possible. They always said to me, Henry, you do our accounting. You have all the numbers. If we have it for every other department, we have it for them. So consequently, they should be able to extract it from the same accounting system. So maybe this is a first year transition. It might be a little harder, and we can't get all the years, we can't get all the detail. But now that I know, I was always told, you give us the top line and we take care of everything else. But if I know that we can request what every other department provides us, I think that would be a wonderful piece of information for the decision maker.
Yeah, you just can't alter it. You can see it. You can take a look at the history, because my experience as a former elected official, as a member of the legislative body in New Haven, the Board of Alders, and I chaired the finance committee, is we would argue the bottom line, and we would ask how they get to the bottom line, what items are being included in the bottom line, and you'd get a story, and then you'd look at the budget next year and say, but you didn't spend that $10 million the way you were going to spend it. Now, they had a right to do whatever they wanted to do, but it undermines their credibility if they come back and said, the reason we need the increase is for this, and then they didn't use it. So it's really important to get that data so that you can at least hold their feet to the fire and make sure that they are at least providing credible information to the fiscal authority in the city.
Right. One of the issues I've always had is that every other department in the city, we look at the history of their whole budget versus actual. And then they request the current year. And we can say, here's what you did last year. Tell me why you need that.
Mhm.
With the Board of Ed, I understand we can't ask that question. But my concern was whenever they ask for an increase, they only explain what that increase is for. They have a baseline budget of $217 million and they don't account for it. And my best example was when they recruited Dr. Estrella to be the new superintendent. They spent over $100,000 on consultants. But the next year, they obviously did not spend that on recruiting. But because of minimum budget requirement, it's there. So I'd like to see that got zeroed out and the money went somewhere else. So I think in and of itself, even if we're not allowed to question how they allocate the money, it might be a useful tool to get that information.
Absolutely. No, I'll provide you with a brief statement on that.
That'd be good.
Steve,
I'll talk to them.
send it to the full Charter Commission,
Oh,
please.
of course, of
Yeah,
course.
thank you.
And I'll check with the mayor and Leisha.
Yes,
And I'll also check with Greg. I mean, Ed, as head of BET, said he'd like to see it. If Greg says the same, then I can issue a memo referencing everybody who'd like to see it, along with the legal opinion, and say, here's what we get from everybody else. Kindly prepare that for us by this date or something like that. Okay, are we ready to move on to capital?
I think so. What, you have a question? Yes.
Yeah, Benita Raleigh, I just have one question about the public hearings. What exactly is the purpose of them? I mean, what's the purpose?
I can answer that, Henry, if you'd like.
No, please, Ed.
Oh, yeah. So the public meeting is really just a town hall where people come in and express their views on the recommended budget, suggest changes, much the same way as the department heads when they come before the BET. The general public is allowed to make similar requests or express their opinions about the budget. And so, the BET listens and in some instances, I'm sure, there have been changes, or at least the discussions prior to approving the budget based on what the public sentiment is.
Yeah, it certainly adds transparency to and input to the taxpayers.
Well, I was just
Yeah.
looking at, it's again, Benita Raleigh, but the public hearing is at 6:30 and then a special meeting is held immediately following the public hearing and forwards the recommended operating budget to the common council. I'm just wondering how much then input can the public have if that then happens
It's within it,
immediately
yeah.
thereafter.
Well, the public hearing could go on as long as it goes. We just vote immediately. I think there's a vote. I think it's the vote on the capital budget, I believe. I'm not sure if it's a vote on the operating budget. I think that occurs later, or maybe it's the other way around. We actually meet for a half an hour and approve. Is it the capital budget that we approve? And then we
Well, but
have the public hearing?
you're approving the line by line allocation of the total budget. And hopefully it's under the council's cap, but sometimes it isn't.
My understanding is that at the public hearing, we meet for, let's say at 6:30, we meet, and I think we take a vote on the capital budget, and then we have the public hearing on the operating budget.
The way the calendar seems to work is on the 22nd, you have a public hearing on the operating budget, and you act on it on the 27th of March. So there is a gap between the public hearing and your action there. I think what the commissioner might be referring to is that the finance committee holds a public hearing, and immediately after a public hearing, there's a special meeting to recommend the operating budget to the common council. So at the council level, there is no time to allow the public testimony to incubate so that people could think about it, there's an immediate action there. Am I right, Commissioner? Is that what you were looking at?
Yes, that's correct.
All right.
And would that reflect some of Mr. Burnett's issue with the council having more input?
It's very likely that's what he was,
That would be a place, yeah.
I guess if I could give 2 cents on my perspective. The Finance Committee is making a recommendation for the total budget. It's just the cap. So what happens is there's a proposal based on the recommendation from the mayor, based on the discussions with all the individual departments, and now the public. And what tends to happen with the public hearings are they are advocates for either certain departments or very specific projects or programs. So what tends to happen is they're saying something got cut that they want replenished, or they want more money for a certain area. So the first go round with the Finance Committee, you're only affecting the total budget. Whereas when the BET does it, we're looking at the individual items, and they have a full week to consider the public comments before they give that final recommendation going back to the council. So that might be why there's less time on the first go round from finance to the council. But when the BET is making that final recommendation, detailed department by department, line item by line item, there's a week to consider all the hearings that you've had with the departments plus the public comment, so that the recommendation is, yeah, they did change my mind and I think we should put in X or something like that.
Yeah, and I think once it goes back to the common council, if there's no request to increase the cap, then there's nothing for the common council to do other than, I guess, approve the budget. So if there is a request to increase the cap, then I can see where the public might want some additional input at that hearing, because that's the hearing where the common council has to make a decision on the request of the BET to increase the cap based on on adding certain other items to the budget, perhaps in response to the public comment. So the public has no role really to play on the common council level once it goes to the common council and there is no request to increase the budget. But if there is a request, then it seems to me that the public would want to have more of a say at that meeting.
So what you're saying is the public will comment at the Finance Committee, the public will comment at the BET, and if there's a request for the council to increase the cap, the same public will then have the opportunity to comment to the council. Your suggestion.
It seems like a lot, but I think that sounds fair to me. I think that sounds right to me.
Okay. So are we ready to discuss the capital budget?
Can I just ask a technical
other-
question, Madam Chair?
Sure.
How it is now, and I do not want the CFO to rush, but I want to let Mario know roughly when we think we'll be ready for him. Would it be fair? I don't want to take any time, Henry. It's 20 to 8. If I told Mario 8:15,
Oh, I think we
8
talked a
o'clock?
lot about the capital already. I would think 15 minutes to get it.
okay. So I'll tell him 8 o'clock. Is that okay?
But
Madam
he's
Chair?
here, he wants to, he's
Yes.
actually
Yep.
engaged and he wants to listen. Right, Mario?
He's not on, I don't think.
I see him, he's
Oh.
muted. I hope he can hear us. Okay.
Okay.
Tom, do you have capital budget, please?
I just texted Mario and Attorney
Okay.
Tindella, so they know 8 o'clock.
Oh. But Mario
Okay.
looks frozen, so maybe it's just a picture. Okay. Yeah, can we blow it up a little bit?
Yeah, and again, we have a hard copy.
Okay,
Yeah,
and I feel like clicking, Tom. Is that the first, Friday, November 4th?
Yeah, is that good? Good enough?
yes, that's,
For me, if it's okay for everybody else. So what we did this year, and again, this was only this year, every year we look at the calendar, where are the holidays, where are we in our budget preparations? So Friday, November 4th was a week after we distributed the operating budget packages, we sent out capital budget packages. Again, here's the forms, here's the computers, this is how you do it. Monday, November 21st to December 16th, we have about 3 weeks to review, okay? No, they filed the budget requests. So they have a minimum of 2.5 weeks all the way to December 16th, which is 6 weeks, to put in their budget request, okay? Because we're also working so heavily on the operating at that time. So they put in their numbers into the system, and we'll be finished by December 16th. As I said, a department like IT that has to solicit input from many, many departments will say your deadline might be December 15. Other departments, which we know they don't have a lot of capital expenditures, might be earlier. December 22nd, Board of Ed submits its capital request. Right after New Year's, we have a week where Finance and Planning and Zoning Department meet with each department to review their capital budget requests. So what happens is there are 2 sets of meetings that people attend. These are all the departments. So if I estimate 30 to 35 departments on the operating budget, on capital, it may only be 10 or 12. Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, but there are numerous departments that don't have any capital expenditure request.
Town clerk, for example, as Rick said earlier.
Right. Don't give them any ideas. Okay.
And Henry, this is all staff level. so-
Taking notes.
Well, actually, I'm not sure planning and zoning department is, well, here's what's happening. We have our meetings in the budget department. That's 1 week from the 3rd to the 10th. So when it says finance, it's myself, Tom, and Agnes, the deputy budget director. But planning and zoning department, that's the department that Steve Kleppen heads. He or someone from his department sits in.
So it's staff level, it's not the commission, it's staff level.
It is staff level and,
Right,
but the
that's what I wanted to
commission comes
confirm,
in
right.
later. So in essence, in 1 week, we sit and have these 10 or 15 meetings. Here's what you're requesting. They have to give it in priority order. They've got to give dollar amounts. We always warn them. The capital budget is supposed to be a 5-year projection out. And the mayor says it should be planned for capital expenditures. It shouldn't just pop up overnight. So he'll always ask, did you ask for it 5 years ago, 4 years ago, 3 years ago? So that's a question, and we warn the departments, if there's something special going on and you need it right now, let's say there was a compliance problem, or we had a bridge that was cracked and we had to fix it, we understand why there's an urgency. But we try to explain that to them. We go through their requests. Sometimes departments forget that we want it in priority order, not numerical order or alphabetical order. If we only have so much money, which is number 1, which is number 2, which is number 3? That's very important when we evaluate. So we do that with someone from planning and zoning because they're involved with the master plan for the city, and capital expenditures are critical. And every capital expenditure that's approved has to be linked to the planning document. I forget what it's called, Tom Ellis?
POCD, Planning of Conservation and Development.
Planning and,
Conservation Development, POCD.
right, everyone in the state by state law has to have that, and we have to link to it, I believe.
You know, it's, can you, if you don't mind stopping there, that's a wonderful and insightful point that both of you are making. I just went through this in 2 municipalities where I've now put into their charter the requirement to comply with that document, because a lot of municipalities do not take it seriously. They know they have to do it every 10 years to comply with state law, otherwise they can lose out on money. But I don't think the state comes in and enforces enforces compliance. So I think it's a really good practice that you have that.
So in
yeah,
essence,
yeah.
thank you. In essence, what we're doing is we're saying, first of all, if you want an expenditure, how does it further the goals?
Good.
But on the other side, if it's not connected, why are we doing this? You know, what's the good reason and justification? So it's a two-way, and they do that on the input forms. We've been doing it ever since I've gotten here. So it's already ingrained in the culture.
Great.
Um,
That's a
let's-
wonderful practice. Congratulations.
You get extra credit for that. Thank you. It's all Steve Kleppen. Okay, I'm gonna give him all the credit, and we welcome Tom and Greg back. Thank you. We then, so that was 1 week, January 3rd to 10th. On Wednesday, January 11th, the staff, now that final meeting, January 11th, is with the Board of Ed, because they're often the last, and they may have to have a Board of Ed meeting to get it approved, the capital request. So our meetings are really January 3rd to January 11th. 16th to the 26th, we now have the Planning and Zoning Commission, a supervisory body that meets with each of the departments. So if you remember, on the operating side, the BET met with every department. We now have a new body, Planning and Zoning Commission, who meets with each department. And the representative from Planning and Zoning Department, Steve Kleppen, or one of his staff members, sits in on those and informs them like we inform the mayor on the operating side. You heard the first requests, they're making presentations. After the departments leave, the commission can question the department and say, why, how does this fit? And they have a staff member to answer their questions.
And so
And-
this is at the staff level.
No,
Or-
well, no,
No.
the commission is doing the review, just like on
It's a
operating.
public meeting then.
No, no,
No, okay.
Wednesday, I'm sorry, Monday, January 16th to the 26th. It's lines 20 to 23. Planning and Zoning Commission meets with the departments to review their requests. So I'm just making a comparison. Just as on the operating budget, every department sits with us in finance. And we do it earlier in the process on capital to inform our discussions with the mayor. The Planning and Zoning Commission now has someone from the Planning and Zoning Staff Department who sat in on those first meetings with us and sits in on the presentations to the commission to help answer any questions and how it relates to the PSD. Okay, so there's good collaboration there. And that's after the Board of Ed made their request. The 27th, on or before, the CFO, so this is the difference with operating. I come out with a recommended capital budget. Okay, and it goes to the council, to the BET, and the Planning and Zoning Commission. And it includes a report of the impact on the debt service, to the operating budget and the debt ratios. The real issue is, what do we recommend we invest the money in on our capital budget? So I come out with that. Then on February 1st, after I come out with my recommendation, Planning and Zoning Commission conducts a public hearing. So they heard from all the departments, they heard from staff, they read a report that I issued, they hear from the public, and then a week later, February 8th, I present the capital recommendations to Planning and Zoning Commission. So
We
they-
have the 9th, we have February 9th on our chart.
what's a day among friends?
Yeah, it should
Tom?
be February 8th.
What version?
24 hours.
No, I work under the Beatles concept, 8 days a week.
The,
I always wanted.
what is
to
the day
say
of
it.
rest in the 8-day week? What is the day of rest?
No, I always wanted to say it, close enough for government work, you know?
Can I ask you a question? On the 27th, you are simply transmitting the department requests with your recommendation. So it's a broad document.
It's a document, if you think of our operating budget,
Yeah,
Each column represents a milestone on the calendar. So we have one column for pro forma. We have another column for the request by the department. And on operating side, the next column will be the mayor and CFO recommended operating budget. Here, what's happening is we have their department request and the CFO recommendation. Those are the first two milestones.
and then on the 8th, you then, after the public hearing by the P and Z, you then compile them into a proposal in effect,
No, I probably just take that spreadsheet
all right?
and I have an in-person meeting,
That'd be the
in person or Zoom during COVID, where I explain my recommendation and they can ask me questions.
All right, so that's no different than the document you presented on the
The
27th.
document doesn't get updated because of the public hearing.
All right, that's, yeah, okay, it
So
was
it's sort
the
of-
juxtaposition of it.
They get
confused me.
the report, they have
Yeah.
a week to digest it. And then they have a night to beat me up. I mean, to review and ask questions. Okay? Then the mayor completes his review. No, I'm sorry. So I prepare on the February 8th. On March 3rd, a full month, the Planning and Zoning Commission now issues their recommended capital budget. And Tom, it doesn't say who it's going to.
It's gotta be the mayor. at this
To the
point.
mayor.
Yeah.
Is it to the mayor? Okay. So that makes sense because 2.5 weeks later, the mayor now issues, so he's seen what the departments requested, what I recommended, what the public said, and what the Planning and Zoning Commission recommends. And he takes it all under advisement, and he now issues his recommended capital budget to the Board of Estimate and Taxation.
So just to summarize, the P and Z, either staff level through the commission, has this document in front of them from roughly January 3rd to March 3rd.
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Okay, I just wanted to,
You know, there are big dollars and a lot of projects. And
not complaining, I'm just, I'm
No,
just,
no,
yeah.
right. We give them plenty of time to review, to prioritize, because in essence, the commission sometimes says, we want more. We think you shortchanged us here, or we want to cut back something else that we think we don't want to invest in. So they make their recommendation, then the mayor takes it all under advisement and he says, here's my recommendation. And I'm just going to go off script for a second. And it's the reverse of operating. BET is now reviewing this and setting a cap. So Monday, April 3rd, before April 1st, that's interesting. Maybe April 1st was a Saturday, so that's why we scheduled it April 3rd. BET, after incorporating such recommendations of the mayor, Planning and Zoning Commission, and the comptroller, not really the comptroller, may make, forward the same to the Common Council with an expression in writing as to its judgment. So the mayor comes out March 21st, and we have about 2 weeks for the BET to send it on to the council. And they're going to say, here's the total amount we think the capital budget should be. April 6th, the Common Council Economic and Community Development Committee reviews with the departments. That has never been done before. It's new this year. So now we're having another committee of the council review with departments. I guess, I don't know what that means. It's only one date. Is that individual meetings? Is all the departments show up? I don't understand, and it's a new item. I've never seen it.
That did occur last year, Henry. That's not a new item.
That economic and community development reviews with each department their capital budget request?
That is correct.
But-
They do that every year.
Yes, it has happened before during their regular meeting. Each department head comes in and talks about their capital budget requests.
But here's a question, and I apologize for my ignorance. So they've already requested, and I've come out with a recommendation, planning and zoning has come out, now the mayor has come out. And after all of that, this council committee is listening to each of the departments based on their request. Okay, I'm just, I don't understand. And what comes out of it? I'm trying to read here. So just like finance committee recommends on the operating budget, this committee is going to recommend to the council their recommendations?
You could make that analogy. So in the operating budget, the finance committee reviews the operating budget request, makes a recommendation as it relates to the cap, and then brings that forward to the full council for approval. In the
Right,
capital budget, the Economic and Community Development Committee reviews the capital budget and brings forward to the full council for further review and approval of, so it's going through a committee, and it's not going directly from the mayor's office, your office, directly to the full council.
it goes to a committee and
So
then.
that's the conduit to get to the full council,
Okay,
the
got it.
Economic and Community Development
They're the
Committee.
ones because of capital projects or, okay,
And
And-
that's been going on for how many years? Just one?
No, we've been doing, this has been, Tom just mentioned we've been doing it before. We've been doing it as long as I've been on the council. This is my sixth year.
Okay.
maybe it's just, I don't go to that one meeting and maybe that's why I'm not knowledgeable, so I apologize.
So,
But-
so this really sort of addresses the concept that you're concerned about on the operating budget for the council. You have this ability here on capital, but you don't have the same equivalency when you review the operating budget. Is that correct?
What we do, it goes through the finance committee. So usually everything goes to the council through a committee first. So on the operating budget, it goes through Greg's finance committee. And on the capital budget, it goes through economic and community
Okay.
development. Okay, so it's very similar. The only difference is the BET has already established a cap. So the council review is item by item, all of the projects. Correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so let me go back to the calendar. April 6th, on or before the 15th, the Economic Community Development Committee reviews with the departments. And then April 11th, 1 week later, the Common Council may approve, reject, or reduce any item in the capital budget by a vote of the majority, present and voting, or may by a vote of majority of its members present and voting, reinstate therein any item which may have been previously disapproved. The Common Council shall thereupon approve the same as amended or on before the 15th of April in each year, when it shall be certified by the controller. Any item not rejected or reduced by the council shall be deemed approved. But it all has to be under the BET cap, correct?
Where does it say that?
Well, up above,
I don't see a cap. I think
April
they-
3rd, Monday, April 3rd, line 37, Board of Estimate, after incorporating the recommendations, may make forward the same to the Common Council with an expression in writing of its judgment with respect to the amount of funds it is proposed to expend. That's the cap in
No,
such capital budget. And the effect such expenditures will have on the operating expenses. And that may be just the language we put into the calendar. But my understanding is that's where the BET sets a cap.
Yeah, if I could interject for a moment, being on the committee, that committee, what happens is we may move things around in that committee. We do not add to the budget on the capital side. So the Economic and Community Development Committee will interview all the department heads and listen and maybe move items around, but we're not adding items.
But under the ordinance, you have the ability to reinstate. So you do have the ability to add.
I think that's an area where we can improve the language within the ordinance, the charter, to specifically indicate whether or not the council at this point in the process can increase the cap. As Council Member Livingston just mentioned, it's been tradition for the Common Council to move things around, but not have the flexibility to change the bottom line number.
Right, right.
Well, but you might be able to reinstate an item that was cut. You just have to cut something else to.
Yeah.
Right.
Right, which
Stay
talks,
within the cap.
which
That's something
again
that- yeah.
talks to the language that doesn't appear that there's anything in the charter that clearly states the Common Council cannot increase the cap.
Well, none of this is in the charter, Mr. Chair, Mr. President. It's all
In
in
the
the
ordinance,
ordinances.
right?
And the way the ordinance works, it does not look like a cap. Maybe you treat it like a cap. And the concept and the BET responsibility is to lay out why they believe the numbers work the way they do with respect to your overall debt service and the impact on the operating budget. But then when you go to the section of the ordinances on your authority, it talks about the things you can do, but it also then says reinstate. And it doesn't seem to have the same kind of finite language that exists on the operating side, on the capital side. So that's a policy judgment you guys are going to have to figure out.
So is anybody advocating that the Common Council have the authority to do anything different than they're currently doing? For us to look at?
I think that the takeaway is that, at least from the Board of Estimates perspective, the takeaway is that we almost like the planning and zoning, what's the committee, the Common Council Economic.
The Economic and Development?
That we, like them, basically recommend or provide or just give our opinion. And in the final analysis, really, it's, or at least our recommendation, and in the final analysis, is really up to the Common Council to decide on what the capital budget will be.
I guess my understanding, and having done this for a couple of years, it seems to me the BET ultimately sets the tax rates. And what they do on the capital budget, they're always, as the language says, they're looking at approving the capital budget, but the end result is empowering me, CFO is authorized to bond and borrow money to finance these things. And they look at the impact on our debt service and our operating budget. So it would seem to me that if the council changes the number, and especially if they increase it, the BET might want to have a say that says, I'm not sure we want to do that because there's a limit to our borrowing capacity. It may affect our rating, whatever. So I just throw that out as an idea to be considered as we evaluate this.
Yeah. I think that makes sense, Henry, that there should be something more like a cap, but once again, if the Common Council can undo it or can reinstate projects, then that seems inconsistent.
Okay.
And don't you usually always recommend a limit on the borrowing aspect for each capital?
Well, actually, you have to understand, I don't know if you're familiar with the city's recent history.
A little bit.
No, but up until last summer, I had $225 million of approved capital projects, net of expected reimbursements, that we had not bonded for. So the city would pass a capital project budget every year, but finance wouldn't borrow all the money. And part of the reason is that there are very strict IRS rules when you borrow on a tax exempt basis. When you borrow tax exempt, you have to spend it within a certain time period. Some of these projects have been sitting for years, like schools, because we needed to get certain approvals from DEEP and other bodies, and then we had to shift. So there's a little bit of a disconnect between the capital project approval and what I.
Yeah.
So what the controller and I do right now is we poll all the department heads and chiefs who are in charge of spending capital money. And we say, what is your expected cash flow for the next 12 months, essentially? And we do that 225 has gone down to 175. These are existing projects that have been approved. They can come to me and say, I've issued a purchase order, I have an invoice, pay it. So I want to know from a cash flow perspective, what are you really going to be doing this year? How much money do I have to make sure you can do your projects? And then when the year's capital budget gets approved in May, I go back and I say, okay, now we have the new projects. How much of that are you spending in the next 12 months? Last year, we approved about $40 million, and I would say only 1/3 was going to be spent in the next 12 months. So based on their projections of what they're going to spend, and to make sure I don't violate IRS rules, I borrow based on the cash flow expectations. It's not like operating where we pass the budget, this is what we're going to spend for the year. It's, we pass this budget, I add it to everything else I've got to borrow for. And I ask the people, we can't build 4 schools at the same time. I ask everyone, what are you really going to be spending? Give me your best estimate. I want to have enough money so that you can build what you plan to, but not too much that we get penalized by the IRS. So it's not one for one like we do on the operating side.
So maybe that's why it's more loosey-goosey, where the common council can add back in projects, because the finance department ultimately determines how much of that money is going to be bonded, or that those projects are going to be bonded, and so therefore.
From my perspective, money is money. It's fungible. I don't really care what projects are approved, or this one you add in, or this one you take off. That's more of policy set by the mayor and the council. So what I do with the BET is we say, I have this $175 million overhang, and they're saying to me, like last year, we borrowed $90 million, far more than 1/3 of the 40 million in the project. That's why the 225 went down to 175. I then work with our financial advisor and I say, we're getting close to losing our AAA rating. How much do you want to do? How much do you want me to finance? And so there's an interaction there. But what happens, my understanding of capital projects is, once that budget is approved, it empowers me and authorizes me to borrow the funds as economically and as efficiently as I can to finance those projects. I have overlaid those IRS requirements. If I borrowed that whole 175 and another 25 for the current projects, the bankers will take me out to a nicer lunch. We'll lose that AAA rating. So we're trying to juggle a couple of different requirements at the same time.
So the timing of the bonding resolution, early May, allows for the financing of the capital budget to commence on July 1.
When you say bonding resolution, meaning you are
Well,
now authorized to borrow these funds?
Well, that's the last item, item number 16, May 9th, 2023.
Oh,
The CFO submits the bonding resolution to the Common Council. That's a statutory requirement.
Yeah, I think that's.
I'm
where
assuming the
common
timing of
council-
that is,
And that's
so
for
the-
the total, right, that's for the total capital budget approved for that year.
correct.
So once it gets approved, and it should be, I mean, we're way past all the approvals, we tend to borrow once a year in the summer. So we're usually out there July, August. I think one year we started a little bit earlier because we thought interest rates were going to go up. But yeah, this coordinates with our pattern of when we borrow. And just for edification, the reason we do July, August is June 30 in the municipal market, a lot of bonds mature. When they mature and they pay off, investors are sitting on a lot of cash. So in July and August, the supply and demand for tax-free municipal bonds, especially in Connecticut, there's a supply of money and a demand. And so with demand, we'll get to pay a lower interest rate. If we did it at a different time of the year, when there's less demand, we might have to pay a higher interest rate. So yes, we coordinate the timing of our borrowings with the end of this process.
I've got a quick question. To what extent does an approved capital budget have on the debt ratio and the debt service of if in and of itself, whether or not
I
the
think-
capital budget has been
I think
bond.
the number that I mentioned before, the 225 that went down today, as of a week ago, Chitsime gave me the numbers, to 175. So it might be a question of we have 225, I'm sorry, we have certain unspent proceeds that are sitting around from last summer's borrowing, but we expect to spend it down by June 30. I think the rating agencies look at that overhang, I'll call it, and that's a negative. It's out there, we know you have to borrow it. But the ratios which they look at most closely for the rating are how much have you actually borrowed that you're committed? Remember, the rating is an evaluation and assessment on what is the likelihood, or I'll put it the other way, what is the possibility that we will not repay the debt when it matures or pay the interest and principal payments as scheduled. So the overhang is something that they watch. They want to see us reduce, but they're really looking at how much debt is outstanding, and then they compare it to the grand list and other economic indicators. So the other thing is on the operating budget, they look at the ratio of our debt service expense as a percentage of our total expenses.
Right.
Okay, so it's interrelated, a little complicated. So as I said, I borrowed 90 million this past summer. It was the largest borrowing I think our financial advisor had seen for the city. He's been doing this for over 20 years for us. And it was at a significantly higher interest rate than the prior year. As we all know, rates have gone up. So that impact on our debt service was significant. So we're watching all these variables and trying to, in my mind, stretch out some of these capital projects. If I can do it 2, 3, 4 years from now, that's a little bit better. We have some of the bonds mature every year, and we're juggling several different factors.
Okay, any other comments, questions? So we can move on to legal.
All right, I'm stopping the share, right?
I'm going to jump off at this point. I have another matter to attend to.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Ed.
Thanks, Ed.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Who is bringing in Mario?
Mario's here and Brian are both here.
Okay,
I don't know if they're,
we can't see them.
and they're muted. Yeah,
right. See me?
Yep, there's Mario.
Are you able to see me though?
Do not see you. We hear you.
No, no,
right.
we can hear you.
There you are.
It's Brian.
That's Brian.
All right, Mark, okay, just bear with me for a moment here. I know someone else had a problem with the Zoom link. It was, I was told earlier in the night, I also had a problem with the Zoom link. At least I was unable to enter through my PC, get any audio through my PC, but I was able to work it on my phone.
Yeah.
Can
We
I,
have a lot of problems getting organized tonight.
can I ask a question? Because I apologize, but it's getting late.
Yes.
Does the group need Tom Ellis's presence going forward? I'm willing to stay and help.
I don't think so. I think we're gonna finish, we finished with finance and we're gonna move into legal.
So we
So
are.
you're excused. Yes, we
excused.
appreciate.
Thank
Yes,
you very much for the opportunity.
I'm sure we'll be coming back to you with more specific questions for you to solve our confusion.
Okay, we'll.
Thank you, everyone.
And we'll try to be ready for you. Thanks very much.
Bye now.
Good evening.
Good evening. Steve, you want to lead this?
I'll simply introduce, I mean,
Okay.
the distinguished gentlemen who are with us, you probably know better than I do. We have the Corporation Counsel, Maria Capoa, and a Deputy Corporation Counsel, Brian Candela. And what I've asked from the legal department is for their perceptions and observations, same thing that I asked the president, chairman of the budget committee about the budget process, about where the potholes are, where the problems are, what specific sections, knowing of course that we're looking at the entire document, but what specific sections of the charter have posed problems for them. So and keep in mind that we write the charter for the public. We write the charter for the mayor and the council and other public officials, but the people who work with the charter every day of the week are the people in Mario's department. So it's really important that that we keep them informed and that we certainly try to be responsive to the concerns that they have about the document. So without further ado, I'll defer to the Corporation Counsel.
Okay, Mario?
Good evening, everyone. Have you had I don't know if everyone's had an opportunity to read the memo that we produced.
Unfortunately, we got it late this afternoon, so probably not.
Okay, and we could come back for a future meeting if you'd like to answer questions or to provide further input or assistance. The thought was to provide to you some initial thoughts, and then I don't know if your counsel, Attorney Mednick, wants, would review that and then come back to you. And again, to the extent that you want us to be involved with those discussions, we can be. So I just wanted to walk you briefly through the memo that we did, and also make reference to whom in the law department probably be the relevant person for each recommendation or comment to provide future assistance to you.
Okay,
So,
great.
with regard to Charter Section 1-241, it's entitled Division of Purchasing. And the statutes mention in our memo with regard to Section 1-241, we're also attached as Exhibit A to the memo. It's pretty self-explanatory that we think the commission should attempt to make the provisions of this section more consistent with either federal procurement standards or procurement standards for large cities in Connecticut. So again, my suggestion is that Attorney Mednick review that and then decide if he wants to draft something, to the extent that he'd like somebody from the law department to assist him, whether it be to draft it for his review or to review what he drafts, to provide comment, etc. The person's that I'd like to sign that issue to is Taisha Toms in the law department. So Steve, to the extent that you have, that would be the person in the law department that I would suggest you work with, and then maybe
Thank
come
you.
back to the commission. And some of these things are highly technical, and the thought was for us not to propose changes tonight. We didn't know what exactly you wanted from us, what input, so we thought we'd raise the issue, and then you could then Attorney Mednick could guide us as to how he wants us to work with him.
Yeah, if I may, I have done revisions of procurement provisions in Hartford, Waterbury, New Haven, Middletown, well, Bridgeport failed. but most of the big cities. And what I tried to do, Mario, is develop modern language. A lot of charters have language regarding bids. Bids are not always used. They're not consistent with best practices at the federal level, the state level. So I do have language, and I'll talk to Taisha as we get to that chapter and propose some language to her in that regard. The other thing that I tend to recommend is that we not get heavily codified on it, that we establish kind of the parameters of a policy, and that the policies can be either implemented through policy by your procurement people or by ordinance. And so I do have a methodology for dealing with procurement.
Good. So that's why, again, we didn't propose any language changes. We wanted to raise the issues, give the comments, and then Attorney Mednick will guide us since he's the expert on charter. So next was Charter Section 1-444. And this has to do with sidewalks. Council member Livingston has been involved in a lot of discussions we've had about sidewalks. The city has a desire to create more sidewalks in Norwalk. And as we're doing it, we're spending a lot of time, at least recently, on analyzing Connecticut law and best practice for trying to obtain property in order to create sidewalks. So it's been a hot topic. It's not very exciting, but it's certainly been a hot topic in the law department in Norwalk in recent months. And so here, Steve, Taisha has been working on this in our law department. So to the extent that you, either want to have her, you may want to get her, I would suggest maybe get her further input on this, because we've done a lot of independent research. So we
This
didn't want to.
is an area that I'm not as well versed on. So
That's why I'm suggesting on that one, we gave all the statutes in Exhibit B, but my suggestion is you let her walk you through that, outside of a public meeting, just, with her one-on-one, and then you can figure out how whether you want her to draft something or however you want to handle that.
Unfortunately, this is where I entered public life in Norwalk some 55 years ago, overseeing the 65 miles of sidewalks called footpaths. So I have some experience with this subject.
Were you the sidewalk inspector?
I was the designer. I laid out the plan, street by street, and instead of being called sidewalks, they were called footpaths, so that we could get the process done and get the kids to school off the street and on something that was safer. Norwalk has an interesting history on this issue because zoning had waived the requirement for many, many decades for sidewalk construction with developments.
There's a movement to do more sidewalks and in the city, and I commend, a lot of towns just don't deal with it because it's too difficult. And I commend the council, the mayor, and Jim Travers and his department for moving forward with this. Anyway, so we'll again, Taisha could work with Attorney Mednick on this, and then he can report back to the commission. Is my suggestion. Next was Section 189 and 1226, which deal with the powers and duties of the mayor. I don't know, this was an issue, I think, raised by Darren Callahan. I don't know if I would recommend myself making any changes at this time. I know that he, from time to time, has difficulty getting the mayor. The mayor's a busy person, and he'll make himself available. People could go to his house to have him sign, but contracts. I think that's where Darren was going on this, as we become a bigger city. And I think he just raises the issue, and Attorney Mednick could give his perspective as to what other bigger cities do, or cities of the size of Norwalk, with regard to the mayor actually having to sign. I'll just give you an example. There's a town in the valley. I settled a case with them, and it's been like 6 weeks, and I still haven't gotten the signatures on a settlement document. And the attorney said, I've been trying to schedule a meeting with the mayor, for him to sign stuff, and this is in that pile. So I apologize it's taking so long. It even happens in smaller towns, but Attorney Menning, what's your perspective on this? Has this issue been raised in other?
Yeah, no,
communities?
I've not addressed it in a number of places. Because usually it does require mayor signatures. When I was corporation counsel, I developed a system for facilitating that process. That's 25 years ago. I could take a look at some of the other larger communities. I just can't imagine mayors being burdened at a certain price. There might be caps that you can create where the mayor would sign above a certain amount, but I will look at that. It's not something that has come up as a problem, believe it or not, in all the charters I've done.
It'd be interesting to see what some of the bigger cities have, and if
Yeah.
there is a threshold where the mayor doesn't have to sign, but nonetheless, I'll leave that to you. Again, we're not recommending that there necessarily be a change to that, but just recommending that it be looked at, and as the city gets bigger and there's more contracts and more, you're quite frank, to be frank with you, I think that over time, we've gotten more things signed off on, gotten more things approved by the council than had probably been in the past. If you look back 20, 30 years. So as the red tape, I think, increases, the thought was to just raise this, bring it to your attention. And we really were interested to know what other communities of a similar or bigger size have done. Next was, I'm on page 2 of our memo, the second full the first full paragraph, the second paragraph of the first full paragraph, which starts with the law department further recommends that this commission review and clarify Article 5 of the charter. I'm assuming that Attorney Mendick is already aware of this, but there's just some issues with, for example, just various language being outdated, whether it be section 1-216, 1-222, 1-224, 1-22 or 1-225. And the memo indicates where there's issues and where there should be changes. For example, salaries, for example, in section 1-222, salaries identified in the article need to be updated. And section 1-225, it should be clarified and explained that salaries of the employees of the city are negotiated in collective bargaining, and the council approves the negotiated collective bargaining agreements, et cetera. So I know it's been a long night for you. It's pretty clear there.
On that one, Mario, are you basically thinking that salaries should not be quantified in the charter, but just perhaps be in ordinance?
Yes, I think I think that the charter is the backbone, but that it branches off. The rules, the regulations really should branch off into the ordinance. The specificity should be provided in the ordinances.
Yeah.
It's so difficult and time consuming to change anything in a charter that our recommendation is, to the extent that any specificity is required, to be done within ordinance, not in the charter. And that would include salaries.
Yeah.
But again, that's sort of a business decision, not necessarily a legal. I mean, where it's clear that the salaries are outdated, we're bringing it to your attention. That's a problem. To the extent as how you want to handle it, that becomes a business decision. But certainly, I appreciate you asking. Our recommendation would be to take that out of the charter and put it into the ordinance.
Okay, more sense.
With a lot of these things, it does. And
Do you have somebody assigned to that, Mario, or are you just gonna leave it to us?
on these issues, that's a good question. I would say, Steve, to the extent that you need somebody in the law department, maybe Brian Candela, but I mean, these are kind of self-explanatory issues.
Yeah,
I think as you were probably gonna catch them anyways, but we just raised them.
I've
We
revised,
extended-
yeah, and look, I mean, I think the instruction that we have is to try to change as much of this document as we can, so I'm gonna try to constitutionalize the document as much as possible and move things to the code of ordinances.
Yeah.
But as I have questions, I'll give Brian a call or you a call in this
Okay.
area.
Thank
With
you.
regard to the next section, the law department suggests that you review and clarify Article 8 of the charter entitled Parking Department. I would suggest that Attorney Mednick understand what and maybe Darren Callahan would be somebody who could assist you if you'd like on this one, if you want to mark down Darren's name.
Got it.
I just think it should be consistent with the way our parking department is, our transportation department is currently configured.
One of the things, Mario, that I'm thinking about recommending to the commission, because you don't have a lot of departments in your charter, which is a good thing from my perspective. And so my thought on some of these areas would be to basically, in the department section, establish the way you create departments. How do you create a department? Through ordinance, through budget, however you do it, what should be the elements of it, etc. There may be some that you mandate. You want to have a police department, right? You want to have a fire department. Those things may be mandated, but again, they should be created somewhere else, because you also have a welfare department in your charter. We haven't had a welfare department since what, the 1980s, in the state of Connecticut for any local department. So my instinct is that rather than naming departments, I would recommend that we simply say there shall be departments to address issues of transportation and parking. And if there's not an ordinance in place and it's in the charter, then you put the current provision in a temporary chapter of the charter to await the adoption of an ordinance so that we don't eliminate something that needs to exist. But what I think you're saying to me is that the way you do it is probably not manifested in the charter.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that's exactly it. And I think that, again, this goes to less specificity
Yep.
within the charter because, when the city wants to improve its the way it operates by doing a reorganization as was done, at least since I've been here in the last 10 years, you don't want to be hamstrung by the charter, unnecessarily. So I agree, yes, with that
Gotcha.
approach.
Gotcha.
But again, this is just one that as it reads today, it's not consistent with what we're doing.
And Darren Callahan's in your office?
Yeah, he works with transportation departments. That's why, to the extent that you
good.
have questions,
Super.
you need someone's perspective. I'm just trying to give you the right person that is the best person to give you perspective on various issues. Next would be we reviewed. We also suggested reviewing Article 15 of the charter entitled "Streets, Sidewalks, and Building Lines." And so I would again just work with Taisha on this since she's
Got it.
becoming our sidewalk and street law expert.
And that section again would really be under the pretty much the jurisdiction of planning and zoning, setting regulations. Or not? Was I don't know if we had planning and zoning when that was put in the charter, probably 1913.
Well, I'm making reference to the fact that there's sections within Article 15 that deal with streets and projects that may be outdated.
Mhm.
Yeah. But my question really was, do you think that belongs, we need to define what planning and zoning currently is and what their responsibilities are?
I wasn't addressing planning and zoning.
Okay. All right,
This was
they
just-
handle these items though, correct?
No, I mean, no, not streets, sidewalks, and building lines. Be
Setbacks?
more DPW,
Yeah.
transportation, but no, it's not a, I mean, planning and zoning may approve a site plan or a subdivision, that has, where they're dealing with, building lines, but no, I mean, for here, the issue we're raising is with regard to how it may be outdated with regard to, for example, particular streets and projects. So
Okay,
again, it's a lot of this is highly technical, and I think I don't want to waste time in a public hearing on it, but I just wanted to raise it, gives your attention, let you know who you could work with and how we could help you, I think.
Got it. Thank
By
you.
the way, I skipped over back on the first full paragraph on page 2, which is the second paragraph or first full. The last sentence, charter section 1-230 is entitled employment of attorneys. And I could work with you on that, Steve. It's inconsistent with what I think all communities really do, where it says that the mayor has to approve the employment of anyone other than the corporation council, subject to common council approval. It just practically, you really can't function that way. So let's assume there has to be an investigation done. The corporation council's got to hire counsel for that. I can't take it to the council and say, we're going to do an investigation of somebody. There's various times where the city needs to retain counsel. And I think for section 1-230, the way it currently reads is the mayor, in his opinion, when it's necessary, may with the consent of corporation council, with the consent of the council, employ other attorneys other than the corp council in matters affecting the interests of said city, and all services shall be rendered to said city by such attorneys who shall be paid for in the same manner as other claims against the city. Steve, you and I could work on that section. I think it should be, I think that power should rest with the corporation council.
There's common protocols for that, Mario, throughout the state. Most I had full authority to hire attorneys. Now, where the council would get active is if I exceeded a budgetary amount, or if I exceeded lines in my budget. That's where a council might get involved, but they would not normally be involved in the decision to hire an attorney.
Yeah, and I really think we need to fix that, because it's just, so for example, you have investigations, you have other times where strategically you want to hire the right counsel and you don't want it to get disclosed because it could be a huge disadvantage to the city if the strategy gets disclosed. So, I think that power should rest with the corporation council for good reason. And quite frankly, council's hired all the time for the city, for example, by our insurance carrier. And that's just really, and then the corporation council's given notice, and I guess is technically it's subject to corporation council review. So I can say, hang on, don't hire Attorney Mednick. I would never say that, but by way of an example.
I hope not.
No, but you know what I mean? Like,
Although their rates are very low, so that's fine with me.
I don't blame you. But the point is, they make the decision. Corporation council is aware of who they're hiring, and I guess could say, hang on, we have a real problem with that attorney. We've done that once or twice before, based on who they're choosing on panel council. But again, the power's got to be with the corporation council. Otherwise, you really can't do the job, quite frankly. So, and I think if we can fix the chart, we'll also fix the ordinance. There's a corresponding ordinance, which we should fix as well. So Steve, if you could be in touch with me on that, and you and I'd like to see what other communities do, and then we'll come up with something to propose that works. Last section in the memo, section 1-663, payment to widows should be removed. Refers to widow of an employee from 1955. And a couple other small things that are cited in the memo. Again, self-explanatory. I think what I wanted to what Brian and I wanted to convey tonight is we're here to help, and what we've suggested to Attorney Mednick from Jump Street, along with Councilman Livingston when we first met, was tell us how you want to use us for research, writing, to bounce ideas off. I'd rather not just have one person in the law department doing. I think depending on what the issue is, I could help you find the appropriate person. And throughout this process, we'll be here to help with whatever you need.
Thank you. Madam Chair, if I may, as I'm going through, as we start going through the document, because we have a fairly ambitious schedule, Mario, and I'll be going chapter by chapter or article by article. I will definitely be calling on you and try to get assigned to the right person to look at these things, because I will need backup, and I want to make sure when we're conducting surgery that we're not taking any parts out that you guys would find problematic. So I will make sure as we go through it on the chapter by chapter basis that you're fully involved, and where I need help, I will be begging for help. Thank you.
Yeah, and Attorney Candela is on as well. Did you, I just want to ask if he has anything that he wants to add?
No. I think that that we asked each of the attorneys in the law department to review the charter and to identify issues. And so we had a lot of eyes taking a look at this. Everyone kind of brought some issues to the forefront, and it tended to track with their practice area. And so it wasn't shocking who came up with what. And I'll just echo what Mario said, that the law department, Steve, is at your disposal to assist you and the city of Norwalk in this endeavor.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Any member of the commission have any questions or comments? I hear none and see none. What, anybody else? Greg, Tom? Greg? No? Oh, okay, so Steve, what are we going to focus on the 21st?
Thank you. So what we have currently for the 21st, Madam Chair, is I was going to try to do it. I'm glad the council are still here. A preliminary look at Articles 1 through 3 to see if I could at least give you the outlines of what that should look like. I may certainly need to talk to the Corporation Council about the issue of reapportionment to see how they have handled reapportionment of council districts in the past, because the charter really doesn't address it. And so we could do that, and I will work my tail off to bring you those 3 chapters. They won't be finalized. They won't be vetted. I will probably try to talk to the Corporation Council's office as I'm going through it. Or the other option is, if you want, although I was going to do that the first meeting in January, is to start trying to draft something on the budget side. We went through, unless you guys want to have more discussion of it, maybe part of the meeting on the 21st would be a discussion of what we heard tonight to give me instructions about what I should place in the charter language for the first meeting in January. So
Hey, man, can I make a suggestion?
please.
Yes.
Because I participated as counsel last time when we did the charter revision process, so I'm very happy to have you on board this time. On navigating the ship, but quite frankly, doing a much more thorough job of cleaning up the charter. I would just suggest, based on my recollection of timing and the city's so busy, we have so many things going on, and I know other cities are busy, but Norwalk is particularly busy with development. So many things. To the extent that you could start drafting and because obviously there's a deadline here, right, for May. So I think I don't know what the chairwoman thinks. I'd be more, but I would say, to the extent that you could start drafting and getting drafts out and letting people work with it. And by the way, this group, I'll tell you, especially some of the council members, they're really good at editing, and there will be discussion and participate. They're really good at it, and so Brian. Attorney Candela on the ordinance committee, that could be a part-time job in and of itself, and dealing with the council on that. And they're, so I would give yourself a little extra time with this group. They're really good, and there'll be a lot of discussion, I think, once language is drafted.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm thinking there might be a lot of wisdom to start with the budget rather than the structure of the physical structure of the
Right.
state, because it's fresh in our mind after tonight, and it there'll be total focus in the city on that process over the next few months.
All right, so we'll flip it around. So I'll take the
That's
contents.
why I'm interested in what other people feel
All
on
right,
that.
I'm sorry.
So are there any thoughts on that? No? Yeah. Yeah, it's just, it was so meaty tonight and it will be in front of us for the next few months. So I think that will be helpful.
All right, I'll flip it. I'll flip the
Okay.
21st and the
Just
meeting.
so I understand for the committee. Budget, December 21st, and then the first one in January, we'll start doing Article 1.3.
Yep.
Thank you. Because we need to get both of those up and
Yeah,
down.
and I had a thought on the Article 1 through 3, and we talked about this several meetings ago, but providing all of us with the maps that exist, and we have 2 of the 3. We have a map of the taxing district and the voting district, but not the wards. So that when we get to that section, it's very confusing if you don't have a map in front of you to look at it. And I don't know if there's any wisdom in having the map being an addendum the maps being an addendum in the charter.
The district should not be memorialized in the charter.
The taxing
district-
districts.
Well, the taxing district is different. That should go in the back of the
And
document.
the war, yeah.
Yeah, but the council districts should be created by a reapportion committee by ordinance. And they shouldn't be laid out in the charter. And somebody needs to explain to me the wards and how that works and why that's there. So.
Well, that's my point.
Well, Steve, in a quick scenario on that, that's separated up by the elections. The congressional one that just came out, the new one is for the state and federal elections. The ward one is actually the councilmanic districts in the city.
Right.
Are there, so that's,
And they were created by, how were they created?
the council, the congressional ones are created obviously by.
No, I know how congressional and general assembly, but how did we create the council districts? Maybe the corp counsel's office has a,
Yeah, we can get that for you because
Yeah.
it's been changed so many times over the years, but I can get that. I spoke with Jordan tonight that I would get him the maps just so he has them. So we have a starting point. We'll get that information to you.
okay, good. Thank you.
That's an election thing.
All right, so I'll work on budget for the next meeting.
Okay. All right, anything else anyone wants to bring up? Any suggestions, comments, concerns? Hearing none, seeing none. Motion to adjourn would be in order.
Come on.
Mr. McQuaid. Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, we are adjourned.
Right.
You all.
Thank you all.
Night.
Good night.
Thanks, everybody.